Pluto needs you. Pluto has always needed you, and now it is time to tune into the Pluto energy. My name is Archie Dunlop. This is Talking Astrology with Archie, and it is Friday, August the 14th, 2026. I will start this video by looking at the overall planetary picture, and on the surface it really does seem as if not a great deal is going on. It all seems very quiet, at least theoretically speaking. When I just look at the broad sort of planetary energies, that doesn't mean that nothing is going on. I mean, we have got different countries, different politicians with their individual horoscopes, which could manifest at any time. But just looking at things generically, there doesn't seem to be much going on. But I do have this feeling that Pluto really is looking for attention, and this is something that I want to discuss in this video. And so, having looked at that, as well as the overall planetary picture, I will be turning to the 12 signs. I'll be going through all 12, and I will finish the video with an I Ching reading. So I will begin by looking at the overall astrological picture. So here is the chart for today, Friday, August the 14th, 2026, set for noon New York time. And the moon is the thing. The thing about the moon is kind of doing nothing. I mean, the moon is just in Virgo. It's in the middle of Virgo. So the moon is not going to change signs. Okay, the moon will go into Libra tomorrow, but for the moment, that is where it is. And the thing is, what we have at the moment, a situation where a lot of planets are in early degrees. So, all of those outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Mars, and Venus, they're all in the first decanate. So not just the outer planets, they're all in the first decanate of their sign. So many of these planets are in the first decanate of their sign. There's Mars at 2, Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, all in the first decanate. Well, not the Sun, but Mercury and Jupiter in the first decanate, Venus in the first decanate, Pluto in the first decanate, Neptune in the first decanate. So that means that the moon potentially makes a lot of aspects at the beginning of a sign, but as the moon moves through a sign, there are no aspects left. So if you look at those two planets in late degrees, the sun at, one planet in late degrees is the sun at 22 degrees Leo. You look at that, the moon is only making a semi-sextile to the sun. And then Saturn at 14 degrees Aries, the moon is kind of making a quincunx. And semi-sextiles and quincunxes, they are minor aspects. So that might mean, with the moon being void, that it just could feel, at least on the surface, a day where really nothing is going on. The moon is applying to nothing. And theoretically, it's a day when nothing is going on. I'm not saying that that necessarily is the case, because there are other ways of looking at astrology. You could have World War III breaking out with the moon being void, of course, in Virgo. So things like that could happen. But, on a personal level, I think that for many of us, today just could feel just rather flat. We have ideas, we see the potential, but when it comes to actually seeing things through, it might be difficult to really get a concrete result. And so, as a result, that might mean that today just feels just rather, unsatisfactory. Again, at least on the surface. Now, we do have a conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter forming. So this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is going to be exact tomorrow, and I think it's a great aspect, particularly if you're a Virgo or a Gemini. So Mercury rules those two signs, and so Mercury moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter, that really does give Mercury a boost. And we can talk about Mercury-Jupiter in many ways. I mean, one way of looking at Mercury-Jupiter is to say, oh well, it's about a lot of talking, a lot to say, and we might feel that we have a lot to say, even if we're not a Gemini or a Virgo. But where are those words going to go? You have to look at the moon, and the moon is about connection and process, and the fact that the moon is void means that the potential of that Mercury-Jupiter may not be realized today. One will possibly have to wait until the moon moves into Libra. I mean, that's not long to wait. It's just tomorrow that the moon moves into Libra. So I think on the surface, yes, it could be a day which, has potential, but it just might seem, rather unsatisfactory. I mean, one lunar aspect that it's a minor lunar aspect, is the moon making a semi-sextile to the sun. Okay, even if the semi-sextile is not exact, the sun in Leo and the moon in Virgo, there is a certain contradiction there. The sun in Leo, we know about the sun in Leo. That's all about oneself, believing in oneself, perhaps having a real ego, and wanting to get noticed. But then the moon in Virgo provides a contrast. The moon in Virgo is quite modest. Moon in Virgo, doesn't want too much attention, is quite contemptuous of people demanding attention. And so there is that kind of contradiction, and perhaps we have to integrate the two energies. By all means, believe in yourself, but also make sure it's grounded. Make sure that belief actually has some connection with reality, and there's where the moon in Virgo comes in. And however brilliant you are, it doesn't mean anything if you haven't sorted out the details of a matter. You haven't sorted out the framework. Genius needs a framework. If it doesn't have a framework, well, it's just so much hot air. And so maybe there is a constructive way to use that moon semi-sextile the sun. And then there is Pluto, and my view that Pluto needs you. Well, I'll talk about that in a moment, but let's just quickly look at the picture from the viewpoint of Australia and New Zealand and the eastern part of Asia. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand at noon today, the moon is going to be earlier in the sign. It's going to be at 9 degrees Virgo. But even though it's earlier in the sign, the moon is still void of course. So it really is in Virgo right now that this voidness is really quite long lasting. You can see the moon really was not making any substantial aspects. You see, the moon did make a sextile to Mars, but that was yesterday. Even if you are in Australia, so what I said today, or what I say today, with the moon being void, it might just not feel that anything is going anywhere. That applies to you if you're in Australia as much as it does if you're in California. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at in the center of the solar system, and Mars is getting closer and closer to Uranus. So Mars is just sort of 1.25 degrees from making that conjunction of Uranus. So I think that heliocentric Mars-Uranus conjunction is starting to make its influence felt. And, I've said that certainly from a geocentric point of view that I don't think much is going to be happening today on a personal level. But I'm still mindful of the fact that Mars is conjunct Uranus, and I suspect if that Mars-Uranus conjunction does manifest in the real world, that's going to be more about the weekend, perhaps Monday, but this is not today. I just don't think that Mars-Uranus conjunction is yet making an impact. Venus is making a square to Saturn. And that Venus square Saturn may just add to this feeling that nothing is happening, especially on a relationship perspective. Venus square Saturn is quite sort of cool. And with the moon is in Virgo geocentrically, Venus square Saturn heliocentrically. People are being cool. They are looking after themselves, looking after their own interests, and from an emotional point of view, they don't want to give too much away. And then there is a question of Pluto. Pluto needs you. Why did I come up with that? Well, I think that Pluto has perhaps been ignored recently. I get that feeling, and we should never ignore Pluto. And, there are many reasons why we shouldn't ignore Pluto, but this whole generation should not be ignoring Pluto. And when I say generation, I mean that in the absolute broadest sense of the word, because here's a chart for today, and I've made this point several times, and I probably should make a specific video about it. But the thing is that Neptune, here's the chart for today. Neptune is sextile Pluto. There's Pluto, there's Neptune. Clearly, Neptune sextile Pluto, and Neptune has been sextile Pluto for a huge amount of time. I mean, here's a chart for, an event in the 80s, the Bhopal explosion. I'm not really talking about the Bhopal explosion. That took place at the end of December 1984. So that took place, over 40 years ago. And there's Neptune at 0 degrees Capricorn, Pluto at 3 degrees Scorpio. So, Neptune was sextile Pluto 42 years ago. And, look at my chart. Indeed, look at your own chart. Here's my chart. I was born on May the 30th, 1962, over 64 years ago. And there it is. There's my Pluto at 7 degrees Virgo and Neptune at 11 degrees Scorpio. Neptune sextile Pluto. And so this next Neptune sextile Pluto is talking about this wider generation, this lasting decades and decades and decades. And you watching this video, you have got Neptune sextile Pluto. We've all got Neptune sextile Pluto. And it's something that we perhaps take for granted, but Pluto does want to be recognized. It's not just some sort of outer planet thing that can be ignored. We are all part of the same collective, and that Neptune sextile Pluto is okay. That Neptune sextile Pluto, may be describing some of the massive changes that have taken place since the Second World War. I mean, okay, there are a lot of changes taking place technologically, solidly since the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century. But some of these changes, the social changes that have taken place since the Second World War, have been massive. And I think with Neptune sextile Pluto, it is the real recognition that we are all connected. An example might be the weather. When you look at what's happening with the weather, that there have just been pictures, like the Guardian had a series of pictures of Europe with everything completely desiccated, all these places that dried out. I saw this picture of Hyde Park. I haven't been to Hyde Park for years and years, but Hyde Park was just a desert, just a dried up desert. And it was quite shocking because I haven't seen Hyde Park in London for such a long time. So we're all part of a collective experience. We're no longer perhaps individuals with Neptune sextile Pluto, or at least we share something. It's not even an age thing, because Neptune and Pluto has just been going on for so long. So we think about, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, or whatever. But all of those generations, they all have Neptune sextile Pluto. So there is this wider generation. And now it's becoming clear that what one person experiences in one country, someone else experiences the same thing. And it doesn't even matter how old they are, what the age difference is, what the generational differences are. And so Pluto is becoming really quite pressing. And the change of Pluto is sextile Neptune. That Neptune is just able to cross, all generations, all boundaries, national boundaries, and so forth. It's all becoming part of the same thing, and we need to accept and embrace Pluto. I mean, Pluto is definitely asking for something, and to understand what Pluto is asking for, one perhaps should certainly monitor Pluto. What is Pluto doing? Pluto's gone into Aquarius. So Pluto went into Aquarius for the last time in November 2024, just after Trump got elected. And Pluto will stay in Aquarius until the 2040s. And I think Pluto needs us to recognize it, because if we don't recognize Pluto, and if we don't recognize what Pluto is about, then Pluto will start to manifest in unwanted ways. And with Pluto in Aquarius, there are different ways of looking at Pluto in Aquarius. I mean, Pluto in Aquarius, as I've said on numerous occasions, can be about totalitarianism. And it's about totalitarianism, especially if we don't recognize it. We don't see what Pluto is doing. I mean, some people will be recognizing Pluto in Aquarius. They might not know that they're recognizing Pluto in Aquarius, but those who are perhaps trying to control our lives, trying to restrict our freedoms in whatever ways you think. It's not about particular political viewpoints. I mean, if you're a progressive, you will regard your freedoms as being curtailed in one particular way. If you are conservative on the right, you will be concerned about other sets of freedoms being lost. But it might just be that it's like a candle burning at both ends. Freedoms are being taken by people on the left, they're being taken by people on the right. People on the left are getting certain freedoms taken away. Those on the right are aware of other things being taken away. But there is this feeling of totalitarianism and creeping totalitarianism. And with Pluto in Aquarius, that is perhaps starting to manifest, particularly if we do nothing about it, if we don't recognize that Pluto. But there is the other side of Pluto, which Pluto in Aquarius is very concerned about its own freedoms. Pluto is the planet of obsession, and I think that Pluto as an energy wants to be recognized and honored. We can recognize and honor Pluto by being perhaps obsessed about the fact that Pluto is in Aquarius, and knowing that it is a struggle and that we need to think about our own ideas, but we also have to relate our own ideas to something quite sort of collective. And I think part of the challenge of Pluto in Aquarius is is not to get too caught up in us as individuals. And I think that why Pluto in Aquarius really matters, well, why Pluto needs us, it's really made more pressing by the fact that the North Node has now gone into has now gone into Aquarius. Oh, sorry, that's my chart. You're sick of my chart by now. Let me just let's put the regular today's chart here. So Pluto's gone into Aquarius, and the North Node has gone into Aquarius. So the North Node is in late Aquarius. Pluto is in early Aquarius, and so Pluto and the North Node are converging on one another, and there will be a point where the Pluto is conjunct the North Node. And now we've just had this change. This is the way forward. The North Node is the way forward. The North Node is in the same sign as Pluto, and I should have perhaps made this clear earlier in an earlier video. This is why Pluto needs us. This is why all of us need to really, incorporate the Pluto energy. And I think that really does matter. We can't just ignore it, because if we do ignore it, someone else is just going to use it, and we're then going to be at the receiving end of Pluto. We're going to find our freedoms limited, and it's going to be about control. And so we do need to need to really think about what we need to do to make changes, to make a transformation which is personal but is also collective. And I think that given we've just had this eclipse in Leo, in the opposite sign to Pluto, and we've got the South Node in Leo as well, and I think the problem here, and linking this to sort of totalitarianism, is that there's a lot of egocentricity at the moment. And I think it's going to get quite strong now that the South Node is in Leo. So, between now and 2028, while the South Node is in Leo, the line of least resistance for many people is to put themselves first, to put their own selfish interest first, to just ignore the collective promptings of Pluto. And you can see this in terms of politics, local politics. As you know, local politics is something that interests me. And when you see people engaged in local politics, you recognize that they're only thinking about themselves. They really are. And with South Node in Leo, it's going to be more so. They're just thinking about their own egos. It might be very easy for them to be flattered by people in authority. I mean, that's what authority does. It flatters, and that's how it takes over. So people who could be quite radical, who could bring about constructive change, they don't make constructive change because they just get co-opted by something which just flatters their egos. That's what, for example, if someone gets elected to a city council, what happens is the city council machinery flatters the new city councillor's ego and makes them feel good about themselves, makes them feel wanted and loved, and as a result they just become a pliant machine in the system. And so that is a way how Leo can collapse in on itself. You think about Leo as being a very independent-minded sign, but Leo is vulnerable to flattery, and it can be co-opted, and so Leo can twist into being the opposite of just being a sort of an automaton, just a tool of the system. So the way Leo and Aquarius are interacting with each other, I think is really quite interesting and quite important. And I do make this point that Pluto does need you. Now, as far as the specifics of right now are concerned, why am I focusing on Pluto now? Well, I was I was looking at Pluto's midpoints for a start. What midpoints is Pluto on? So let's look at the 90-degree dial for today. And so if we look at the 90-degree dial, that's the 360-degree dial. So let's switch that to the 90-degree dial. We'll make it the 90-degree dial. There we go. So there is, where's Pluto gone? Pluto's here. So the question is, what midpoints is Pluto on? And so here are the Pluto midpoints. And the two midpoints that I found interesting was the fact that Pluto is on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, and it's also on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And Pluto on the Sun-Saturn and Mars-Uranus, very, very different energies. So you could say that with Pluto on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, you might just say, I am obsessed with the idea of wanting to be alone. I want to be alone. Sun, Saturn. And you don't even have to be a Virgo to want to be alone. Was it Greta Garbo who wanted to be alone? But with Pluto on the Sun, Saturn can be. Of course, Greta Garbo was a Virgo, wasn't she? I think. So with Pluto on the Sun, Saturn midpoint, or some of us might really appreciate solitude, really be quite obsessed about it. We don't want to get involved. We want to just put up the Berlin Wall and that's it. And be quite jealous of our own privacy. And then Pluto is also on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And it's actually very closely on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, because the Mars-Uranus midpoint is at, where's the Mars-Uranus midpoint? It's at 18 Gemini, so that means that Pluto is sesquiquadrate the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And so Mars-Uranus is a different energy, and this is where perhaps Pluto really wants to be appreciated. I was thinking that with Pluto on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Mars-Uranus, is quite a violent energy. Mars-Uranus is about accidents, explosions, demanding results, and so with Pluto on the Mars-Uranus, that could be something about our willfulness, but it could also say something about the world. And I do think, on balance, with the moon void, of course, in Virgo, it's probably going to be quite a quiet day, again, at least for us as individuals. But then Pluto on the Mars-Uranus could be quite explosive, and it might be about people refusing to compromise, and they refuse to compromise, and they decide they're going to go through with it anyway, and it doesn't matter what the consequences are. And I think that actually links with a few other midpoints that we have. I mean, for example, Jupiter is on the at the moment is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. If we move Jupiter along, there's Jupiter, there's Saturn and Uranus. So with Jupiter on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, some of us are feeling quite tense. Jupiter is about how we move forward, and it's on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. There's just something in our way. That Saturn-Uranus, the tension of the Saturn-Uranus. Uranus wants action. Saturn is trying to hold the thing together, and Jupiter is trying to mediate the whole thing. And Jupiter may just want to, break free, and so that could represent, real frustration. And what do we do with that frustration? And somehow we kind of need to break free from it. But going back to Pluto wants to be noticed, and short term, if Pluto isn't noticed, it might manifest through that aspect to the Mars-Uranus midpoint, which could be, quite explosive. But overall, I do think that we need to take Pluto more seriously, and we need to understand Pluto in our own charts, and the fact that all of us have got Neptune sextile Pluto, I think. And that means that we need to manifest it, and we need to recognize how we are, on one hand, part of something larger than ourselves, but at the same time, we as individuals can act in a way to bring Pluto into awareness and honor its energy. And that is all I've got to say on the subject of Pluto. And now I want to talk about the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, August the 14th, 2026. Aries, it's a day when you can be quiet. Maybe you should be quiet. There is not a great deal happening astrologically, really. Not for anyone, regardless of their sign. But you, Aries, may be impacted by this, more than others. As an Aries, you're looking for something to do. You're looking to take the initiative. You want to do something sort of bold and maybe dramatic. But where is the opportunity? For sure, if you really want to look for opportunities, then perhaps you can find something, but it's important just not to force it. Deep down that it is a time of confusion. I mean, particularly today, Friday, and that if you were to really try to enact something, then what actually would happen? What might you imagine would happen? And the answer might be, very little. But, just because nothing is going on in terms of, the external world and how you are interacting with the external world, doesn't mean that you are just completely silent, that you are completely still, that you're just waiting for the situation to change, just not doing anything. I mean, there is some work to be done for sure, but it's the kind of work that is pretty low profile. It doesn't require a huge amount of show. There's no need to boast. You kind of feel just what needs to be done, and you're unlikely to get an immediate payoff. I mean, that is part of the thing, isn't it? If you do something, you kind of want to get an immediate result. But I don't think that today is really a time for immediate results. It's about, small changes and just waiting for those small changes to develop over a period of time. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't think about the future as being something dramatic and transforming. For sure you can. That's absolutely possible. But you have to perhaps prepare for this. Make sure that everything is secure, and additionally make sure that you're on good form. Make sure that you're healthy, and that anything that could undermine you is really taken care of. And so that might be the best way of using the day, to just look at what you're doing. Look at for example, your daily habits. What you're eating, what you're not eating, how you're using your body. Are you pushing yourself too far? And at the same time, Aries, I think that you're probably going to be more sensitive than usual. I think we can say that. And, you can sort of pick up things that other people miss. For example, I don't know, pollutants or just, I don't know, something in the air, chemicals, whether it's in terms of what you're eating, drinking, breathing, small things can have an impact on you. And so, it's a good idea to just make sure, Aries, that, that you steer clear of anything that, could be bad for you. You might think, oh, it's not much, it won't do you any harm. But, you are, as I said, more sensitive than usual, and that means that, as far as is possible, you should head for things which are healthy, and if anything is unhealthy, or you kind of might feel, well, it's unhealthy, but you'll do it anyway because it doesn't matter, it's just a one-off. I don't think that's the right attitude. If anything is unhealthy, you need to take a stand and really get away from it. And in terms of relationships and the other person, being an Aries, you probably think that it's often down to you to take the initiative. It's down to you to be the one to take action, like it or not. I mean, some Arians can actually find that responsibility rather annoying. But as far as today is concerned, the action, if anything, does seem to be with the other person, in any situation. And it's the other person who has perhaps got the ideas. It's the other person who has got a complaint. The other person who is optimistic. So it's always the other person. The other person that feels sorry for themselves and wants attention. And so that's perhaps something you should accept. At least in the short term. Just for today. I mean, things will change, and so perhaps you should make some effort to understand, what the other person wants, what the other person is trying to communicate. But I did indicate that you should be steering clear of pollution, and pollution takes many forms. It's not just about chemicals; it's about just the psychic environment, and it could be that certain people are just inflicting their complaints on the environment, even poisoning the environment with their grievances and so forth. And Aries, I think you should be quick to recognize this. And I think you can be quick to recognize this because, Mars is moving through Cancer. Obviously, Mars is your ruler. And Mars is in a sort of a water sign. It's sort of quite emotionally orientated, and so it's a time when you not only understand what it means to be secure, but you also understand what might undermine that security. And if you have got a difficult emotional environment, an emotional environment which is even being poisoned by other people's attitudes and other people's twisted view of the world, then I think you'll be able to pick up on that very quickly and take the necessary countermeasures. And those countermeasures could just be about getting out of a situation or a place, or getting away from a group of people who are just not being very constructive and are just undermining you at a psychic level. Taurus. The moon continues to move through Virgo, and the moon doesn't actually do much in Virgo, and that could be a good thing. It means, Taurus, that you can largely be yourself. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not, and I think that you certainly have the capacity to enjoy yourself in a fairly low profile kind of way. And I say low profile because the moon is applying to nothing. And so action in the real world, where you're doing something, but you think is amazing, that you think really deserves praise, but you try, but there's a certain lack of response. And it just could be that what's happening is that although it's a day when I don't think a huge amount is happening in the real world, in the material world, it does seem that as far as you're concerned, you are dealing with certain things. And on one hand, on one level, there is a seriousness here. You know that even if you're a free spirit, even if you don't have any actual constraints on your behavior, you also know, or at least you feel, that things just could be better. And there might be a certain feeling of frustration. You want things to happen. You want to see some result. I mean, that is important. Because you are a Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign. It's all very well having ideas and thoughts and so on, but Taurus does often need manifestation in the outside world, and that manifestation may not be forthcoming, or at least may not be forthcoming enough. And so that could be frustrating, and you may feel then that you have to take things further, but I don't think you do. Just because you're annoyed, just because you feel that you're being blocked, doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything that you actually have to do. And you should also be aware that Mercury is starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter. And this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, I think, takes place, over the weekend. And this conjunction, does have an impact on you. I think that it can just be, quietly satisfying, and it can make you just feel better about everything. So, if you're feeling frustrated, which I think you might be, because you're asking yourself, where is the application? Where are the results? So if you are feeling that frustration, I think it is quite short term. And as you move into the weekend, I think that you just might feel just better about things. Even when the moon moves into Libra, the thing about moon moving into Libra over the weekend is it starts to make a conjunction to Venus. And so if you try to be objective, and you just you step back from things, you will, I think, recognize that actually you do have quite a lot of freedom, more freedom than you realize. And if you really look at some of your worries, we've all got worries. I've got Taurus rising. There's always something to worry about. If you look at your worries, if you really go into detail about your worries, you might actually realize that there's nothing there. You might have to do quite a lot of exploring, quite a lot of thinking, but in the end, you see, there's nothing there. You're absolutely worrying about nothing. And so it's quite possible, Taurus, that at some stage in the day, you feel a sense of relief. It really wasn't really that bad. And with relief comes the liberation of something else. Once you're not worrying about something, then something else comes into play, and that something else can be your optimism, and also your imagination. Your imagination starts to work in a different way, not an imagination which is about negativity. You can have an imagination which is not helpful. You imagine all the dreadful things that could happen, but as soon as you put your mind to rest, the imagination kind of switches, and you can start to think about all the possibilities. And as I've been saying over the last, week or so, that Taurus, you are quite inspired at the moment, and you can start to think about, possibilities, and something might just occur to you, that you realize that, yeah, you can do something, and you might have some really brilliant ideas, and ideas which in the end have a chance of being manifested in the real world, but you may be not today. So Taurus, if you do feel negative, if you feel that today doesn't look great, it's important to persevere, not in a really heavy way, but just persevere with a sense of curiosity and a search for understanding. And yeah, you might find that a couple of things that are really bothering you, when you really look at them, you start to appreciate there is nothing to worry about. And once you realize that there's nothing much to worry about, that can actually be quite liberating. Gemini. Moon is stuck in Virgo. I say stuck in Virgo. That doesn't sound very nice, but I think it kind of might feel like that, Gemini. You might feel that, things, aren't really moving, and you can't see any real possibility for taking action. Maybe it just feels like the action and the excitement has already happened. We've just had this total eclipse, and there was a great sense of the dramatic with that eclipse in Leo, and then the moon just went into Virgo, and with the moon in Virgo, well, just feels a bit flat maybe, and Gemini's don't appreciate that, and so when you feel that nothing's going on, you might feel sort of frustrated, but maybe that's a good thing. If the moon, like the moon right now, it's it is in Virgo. It is void, of course. So when I say void, of course, I'm saying that it has made its last major aspect before leaving the sign. Sure, it makes some minor aspects, but doesn't make any major aspects. And so, yeah, the main action has been done. But if the main action has been done and the moon is void, in a strange way, that does give you freedom, because there's a certain emptiness around you, and sort of an emptiness in terms of the world you're living in, and the place you're living in. And where there's emptiness, there is freedom. So if you want to do something, you can. It won't have any implications. There probably won't be much feedback. There won't be much response. And the question is, do you actually need any response? Probably not. And so if there is something you want to do, go ahead. In fact, Gemini, you may have the opportunity to do actually something quite dramatic, something that's almost, out of character. You decide you want to do something, and you see the opportunity, and you gather your strength and your courage, and you do it, and you're just expecting some dramatic response, and you don't know what people are going to say, and kind of interesting but a bit scary at the same time. But you go and do it, and maybe nothing happens. It could be a question of getting away with it, or it could be that just other people, maybe they've seen it all before. Maybe they just don't want to respond. Maybe they can't be bothered to respond. But for whatever reason, there is this general, even apathy. I'm not indicating that you are apathetic, but you just might feel that everyone is apathetic. And if everyone is apathetic, well, that might give you an opportunity. You get going on something in your own way, without any announcements, without any fanfare, and you do it. And what you're doing may, in the long term, be of quite major consequence. But short term, no one sees it, and it may be that what's happening is that Mercury, a ruler, is in Leo, and one thing about Mercury, it is actually doing quite a lot. Mercury's made its opposition to Pluto, and that Mercury opposition Pluto is still there. I mean, it's got a 5-degree orb, but I think it's still manifesting. And Mercury opposition Pluto, might have been challenging you. Pluto might have been wanting something from you, wanting you to sort of recognize its presence, and it was perhaps sending you hints, sending you signals, and you perhaps could see that some kind of transformation was required of you. Pluto wanted something from you. Maybe you were able to deliver it. Maybe you are increasingly able to deliver it. After all, Mercury is making a conjunction to Jupiter. Well, okay, it's not making that conjunction today, but over the weekend, Mercury is making that conjunction to Jupiter, and already Mercury is very close to Jupiter. It's in fact, it's only about a degree from Jupiter. So you might say that you can already start to benefit from it, and additionally, we're seeing maybe that Jupiter-Pluto opposition that we were talking about not so long ago is starting to manifest, and that Jupiter-Pluto opposition is about high standards, wanting things to be done as well as possible. And Pluto wants to be taken further. Pluto is an obsessive influence, and once it gets going on something, it just doesn't stop. And then you throw Jupiter into the equation with that Jupiter opposition Pluto, and you can really start to make things happen. And hopefully that is what's been going on. So the Pluto influence is in the background, and you could say that Pluto needs to be honoured, and Pluto is asking you to look at things again, to look at what you believe again. This is the whole thing about Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto in Aquarius for you, Gemini, is about thinking about what is important to you. Sometimes Geminis can find it difficult to believe in anything. They really can. At least to believe in anything for a prolonged period of time. But Pluto in Aquarius in a fixed sign is asking you to take something seriously, to have a set of beliefs, and you have to decide what beliefs are important to you. What philosophy do you want to align with? Do think about a philosophical approach. There are lots of, obviously, an infinite amount of philosophies around there, but around you, and you have to perhaps make a decision about what you want to align yourself to. And additionally, Mercury conjunct Jupiter, that means that even if you feel that really nothing much is going on today, things are changing. Mercury conjunct Jupiter is an opportunity, and your mind is working well, and yes, you can certainly take action if need be, and you can be dramatic, and you might be ignored because no one notices or no one wants to notice. But also with Mercury conjunct Jupiter, there is a fundamental positivity to that aspect. And additionally, Mercury conjunct Jupiter may say something about relationships and how you're getting on with people, and on a sort of a fairly low level, perhaps a conversational level, you're certainly able to make a pretty good impression, and perhaps you have a chance to bridge a gap. Perhaps there's a gap between you and another person, some way in which you haven't been able to relate in the past, but maybe that gap is in the process of being bridged. But that's something I can talk about when I do my horoscope for the weekend. Cancer. The moon is moving through Virgo. It is still moving through Virgo. And, as far as the lunar aspects are concerned, there really isn't much going on. I mean, the moon is always making some aspect because the moon is moving pretty quickly. And so that's the nature of the moon. But right now the moon, at 17 degrees Virgo, sort of New York time at noon, it means that a lot of planets are in early degrees. You've got all of the outer planets are in early degrees. Mars is at 1 degree Cancer, or 2 degrees Cancer. Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. They're all in the first decanates of their respective signs, and Venus is in the first decanate of its respective signs. So there isn't much of an opportunity for the moon to make any real aspect. The two planets which are in latest degrees, are the Sun at 22 degrees Leo, and Saturn at 14 Aries, and so the Moon, making a wide quincunx to Saturn, or making a semi-sextile to the Sun. These aspects are very minor, and so it could be said, Cancer, that really there isn't nothing going on. I mean, that's one way of interpreting the lack of lunar aspects. And, this might sound a problem, but perhaps it isn't a problem at all. It means that there isn't really much in the way of pressure on you. You can largely do what you like, and you can interpret things how you like. And, that might seem liberating, but it can also seem boring because there's nothing going on. There is no pressure. Of course, different Cancers have different experiences, and you might be listening to this and you might be thinking, oh well, that's great, absolutely nothing going on, and then something hugely dramatic might happen today. Well, I'm looking at things from a general perspective. I'm just looking at things from a perspective of whatever you're looking at this reading from. It might be you've got the Sun in Cancer, or the Cancer rising, or the Moon in Cancer. Whatever you're looking at it from. But, there are going to be other things going on in your horoscope that I can't possibly know about on an individual basis. But just looking at things in a general sense, I don't see any great evidence that a massive amount is happening. And as I've already said, I think that can actually be quite liberating, because you can make your own choices. And with the Moon in Virgo, I mean, the Moon in Virgo, that's a good place for the Moon from a Cancerian perspective. The Moon is still in your third house, the third house from Cancer, the third sign from Cancer, and that's always a place where the Moon, all things being equal, works well. And I think that you'll have no difficulty expressing yourself. But don't be surprised if you don't get much feedback, because the Moon is void of course. The Moon is going nowhere, and when the Moon is void of course, well, on the downside, it might mean that it might feel that it's all a bit boring and so forth. But on the plus side of the Moon being void of course, very often there is just nothing to be worried about. In a horary chart, so when you ask a question about something, will something happen? When the Moon is void, it just often means that really nothing. The answer is no, it's not going to happen, and that can be very disappointing. But if you ask a negative question, something you are afraid of, have I got a disease? Will it will it go badly? Is someone out to get me, or whatever like that? If you have a question where you're asking about a harmful result, and the moon is void, of course, that just means that nothing comes of it, and the moon being void is exactly what you want to see. And so in that sense, Cancer, it might be that you recognize that there really is nothing to worry about. Okay, it might be boring when there's nothing to worry about, but that might well be what is happening at the moment. So it could just be quite an easy Friday when you can wind the week down in your own way, in your own terms, and that might be it. But I should say that Mercury is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and this Mercury conjunction to Jupiter, is pretty close, and it's going to be exact over the weekend. And this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction could just say more about this sort of Leo influence, and I have talked about this Leo influence, in terms of money. And it could be that with the Mercury moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter, there may be some kind of financial opportunity, something going on financially that perhaps you can take advantage of, or you might just have another look at something and just recognize that, hold on, there is a possibility here, that there is a way to make money out of it, or to perhaps get hold of money in a perhaps unlikely way. So, if money is of concern to you for whatever reason, then perhaps you should be utilizing this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, but not just today. I mean, there isn't a huge amount going on today, but maybe that might say something about the weekend. It could be working with money, planning money, something like that. So Cancer, that is something to think about. But overall, Cancer, I think it can be a good day, because it really doesn't seem to be much to worry about, and at the same time, I think that you have a fair amount of freedom. Leo. There is still a lot of activity in Leo, your sign, even though the moon is now out of Leo. The sun, Jupiter, and Mercury are in Leo, and we have a conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter forming, and this conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter, is exact, over the weekend. I mean, it's pretty exact today, Friday, but I'm just thinking that you may not be able to take full advantage of this conjunction because of the position of the moon. I mean, the moon is void, of course. The moon is doing remarkably little, and you can see this in the chart that you've got a lot of planets in early degrees, and so the moon has made all those aspects to those early degree planets, and the planets in late degrees of the sun and the sun. In fact, the sun is in the last decanate of Leo. That's true, and you've got Saturn at 14 Aries. So I know 14 Aries doesn't sound late, but given what the other planets are doing, that is the planet in second latest degrees, I think. Then you've got the moon. So the moon is making a semi-sextile to the sun. I mean, that's all there is. I don't normally look at lunar semi-sextiles when I do these daily horoscopes, but maybe I should in this case, simply because there just aren't any other aspects to talk about. And so moon in Virgo, semi-sextile the sun in Leo is Okay, it's a mild challenge. It's you being forced to see things in a different way, and that could be like you want to think about yourself. You want to put yourself first, and that's kind of how you'd like it to be. And you want to see things in terms of your view. And Moon in Virgo is suggesting something else. It's challenging you to perhaps be a little more realistic, a little more down to earth, and that's not something you necessarily want to do. But this is a semi-sextile. It's not a square or an opposition. This semi-sextile is about something that needs to be integrated and it needs to become part of you. And so Moon in Virgo, Moon in an earth sign, is perhaps challenging you to be more realistic, to recognize that it's not all about you, and that if you're not being taken as seriously as you think you should be taken, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't start and stop with your own ego, although many Leos are not egotistical at all. It's just some textbook generalization. But there is, in general, this challenge, Leo, to bring things down to earth, to be realistic. And it's perhaps in contrast to the energies that were flying around a day or two ago, when we had the eclipse, when we had the sun and the moon, both being in Leo, and so there was a drama to that, but now that drama has sort of largely gone, and you're left with the results, and that might also be what it's about, dealing with the results and dealing with what you now have to do, and that is likely to be of quite a material nature, and so dealing with the material world, bringing things down to earth, could be a part of what needs to be done over the course of the day. But at the same time, Leo, you continue to be quite inspired. You have been inspired over the last few days. Maybe this eclipse, which puts so much emphasis on you and hopefully on possibilities for future action. This eclipse is still buzzing around in the background. It's a new beginning. The moon is now waxing, and it is the start of something new. And there is a potential for excitement, even though today itself might not be particularly exciting. And Leo, you're thinking about things, and some of your ideas, may be quite remarkable, even though it's hard to articulate these ideas. It's hard to put them into practice. I mean, right now it's hard to put them into practice, and that's part of the nature of the moon being void, of course. You try to do something, you try to initiate something, maybe you see an opportunity, maybe it's something to do with money, or enrichment, you try to put it into practice, and it just doesn't seem to work, and you might think that is a poor reflection of the new lunar cycle. But it's just something passing. The moon is not going to stay void, of course, in Virgo for much longer, and tomorrow the moon will move into Libra. Well, tomorrow Saturday the moon will move into Libra, so things are going to pick up, and things are going to very soon become a lot more interesting. Virgo, the moon still in your sign. It is in a position of voidness. Yeah, the moon is void. The moon has made its last major aspect before leaving the sign, and it's not necessarily a bad thing for the moon to be void. When the moon is void, it can often mean that there is no pressure. There's nothing that you need to do. The work has been done, and you might then feel a great sense of freedom, because if the work has been done, if all the possibilities have been exhausted, well, you know, what do you need to do? You can just finish the week, or at least finish the working week. You know, it's a Friday. You know, just doing things, you know, your way, without feeling you've missed anything. But at the same time, with the moon in Virgo, you have a certain amount of control, because, you know, the moon is in your sign, and the moon is in an earth sign. So, you know, if you want to gently apply yourself to getting eventual results, I mean, that is the key thing, eventual results. I don't think you can count on getting any results today. And now you might be in a hurry to finish things off because it's a Friday, but, you know, try as you might, it just might be the case that there just isn't the opportunity, and you just have to, you know, accept the situation, and, you know, look at things in a from a more long-term perspective. And additionally, Virgo, you know, it's probably a good time to be doing things which are, you know, which are quite low key, where you're sort of working on something, you know, in your own way, at your own pace, but you know, you don't want any rush. You don't really want anyone to know what you're doing, because if people know what you're doing, then you know, there can be distractions, and that in itself might give you doubts. If you have to explain to someone what you're doing and why you're doing it, you know, that just drains your energy and can also create negativity. It really can. You know, when you start explaining something, it can lose its power. And we do have Mercury moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter. Now, I don't think that you're going to see the full benefits of Mercury moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter today, probably because the moon is void, of course, but it's a very close conjunction. And this conjunction in Leo, I think it does give you a growing feeling of luck. Yeah, you feel lucky, you feel that things are going your way, even if you don't actually get real acknowledgement of this. You know, it's still happening, and, you know, it's important to be able to, you know, to work on it. You know, again, not just today, but as you move into the weekend, as Mercury makes that conjunction to Jupiter, you know, it just could be that something you're working on, you know, in your own way, at your own pace, can actually be, you know, really successful. In fact, you know, this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, you could say, is you know, one of the best aspects in the year from a Virgo perspective. You know, Mercury is your ruler. It's applying to a conjunction of Jupiter, the most fortunate planet in the solar system. Yeah, it is happening. And so you know, do what you can to take advantage of it. So, you know, just because things seem a bit slow today, with the moon being void, of course, in Virgo, just, you know, keep trying and just think about possibilities, and perhaps you need to think about what you're going to be doing over the weekend. And, you know, over the weekend, I think that, you know, you'll be able to really make the most of this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. I think it's fortunate. It could be about being able to take advantage of something, being able to benefit, perhaps in a material way. And this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is certainly something I will be going into detail about, when I do your horoscope for the weekend, which is my next video. And Virgo, you know, that is about it. And short term, the moon is void, and that just might mean that nothing much is going on, at least in a direct and dramatic way. Libra, you can see that things have changed. I mean, after all, you know, we have just had this solar eclipse. You know, it was a big deal, the solar eclipse. I mean, at least in theory, you know, the sun and the moon were together in Leo at the same time as Mercury and Jupiter were in Leo, and then there is the question of what now. And I think that if you look around you, today, Friday, it could be that you just feel that there isn't a great deal of enthusiasm around, and it's not your problem. It's just other people. Other people just don't seem on particularly good form, and even the atmosphere is just a bit slow. There's just a lack of application, and that might make you feel sort of disappointed. You kind of feel that there is a lot of potential. There should be a lot of potential, but actually, where is that potential? And as far as you and the 12 signs are connected, if we try to be relative about it, you could say that Libra is one of the more happening signs today. I mean, relatively speaking, even though you yourself might feel that absolutely nothing is going on. I think that at the moment, Libra, certainly your mind is on good form. You've got lots of ideas. You're quite inspired in your own way, and you're looking to develop things. And you might have a sudden idea, and you're thinking, well, how can you turn this idea into something real? And then you look around you, and it seems that the world around you is just not supportive of your brilliance. So that's not really your fault, is it? And it just might be down to you to take the action, or perhaps prepare the action. And at the same time, Libra, there is this sort of conflict between hope and despair. I mean, despair is probably too strong a way of putting it. There could be moments of despair because you see that nothing is going on, or it could be that there is just something bothering you which just won't entirely go away. It's perhaps spoiling the day, but then there's an opportunity to just see things in a different way, and that's where the hope lies. And what starts as hope can actually end as a realization that really things are okay. There could be something, at least on an internal level, quite liberating about the day. Getting really worried about something, feeling it's going to get worse, feeling that you've just got something that you have to constantly worry about, constantly bother about, and then there just could be a moment where you recognize that it's nothing to worry about at all, and from there comes a sense of real freedom. Yes, you can have a sense of limitlessness, even though the world itself around you seems to be limited. And so it really is down to you, and it's down to you to make the decisions, to take the action. Although I just don't think today is a great day for taking big initiatives. It's not that they're going to go wrong, it's just that there is no point of application. And you might be wondering, where is the feedback? But it is a situation which is going to change because the moon is the moon is in Virgo right now, and it's void of course in Virgo. So moon is not doing very much. But then the moon does move into Libra tomorrow, and so when the moon moves into Libra, well, just things just get a whole lot better. Particularly now, when the moon moves into Libra, it makes all sorts of sort of exciting aspects. It makes, for a start, the moon makes a conjunction to Venus, your ruler. So that's something to look forward to. And the moon is, in fact, it's going to form a grand trine in air signs. So I talked about this grand trine in air signs a few days ago and how exciting it was. I don't know how you took advantage of this grand trine, but if you feel you missed something, well, don't worry, because over the weekend the grand trine is brought back together by the moon in Libra. So in that sense, Libra, there is quite a lot to look forward to. Scorpio. Scorpio, Right now, Scorpio, you can be gently sociable. I say gently because it's not a particularly exciting day. I mean, it's not a particularly exciting day for anyone, at least on the surface. And so you can be friendly, not necessarily super friendly, but you can certainly go through the motions. And I think you're going to be quite good actually at going through the motions when dealing with other people. You'll just know basically what to say and what not to say, and I think you'll have quite a good sense of detail for social niceties and social etiquette. It's all rather straightforward. I mean, it's rather boring, but you can certainly make a good impression. But that's probably not where the action really lies. I mean, if we can talk about action today, because I do think that today, for many people, not just Scorpios, it just could be a bit flat. But there's something else perhaps demanding your attention, even if you can't necessarily do a great deal about it. And in the short term, there is a conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter, and this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is in Leo, and you could say that it's opposition Pluto. Okay, Mercury was opposition Pluto not so long ago. So was Jupiter, and so you might think that Mercury and Jupiter have gone beyond Pluto, and you can perhaps put Pluto to one side. Particularly on a day like today, when the moon is void, of course, in Virgo, and it's just nothing's going on, or at least it might seem that nothing is going on. But Pluto hasn't gone away. And I just do feel that today is a day when Pluto needs some attention, because it's easy to forget Pluto. It's this very small planet, and the beginning of the millennium, it got sort of downgraded to being a minor planet, and so it's easy to forget. But Pluto does not want to be forgotten, and it wasn't so long ago that Mercury was making an opposition to Pluto, and that Mercury opposition Pluto was about the challenge to really show what you could do. There were perhaps things from the past, things that you had forgotten about, which really needed to be revealed, needed to be really expressed in the outside world. You don't want to keep it to yourself. Pluto, I know that Pluto is a planet which has a reputation for being quite secretive and low profile, but there are times when Pluto does want attention, and it might be the case that Pluto needs you. So what does that mean, Pluto needs you? Well, Pluto needs you to manifest its potential. And I think that, with Mercury opposition Pluto not so long ago, there was an opportunity to express the Pluto energy. And now that Mercury is making a conjunction to Jupiter, I think there is a further opportunity. You could say that Mercury is bridging the opposition between Jupiter and Pluto. So Mercury is sort of picked up the energy of Pluto, and now Mercury is moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter. So it's bringing Jupiter and Pluto back together. And over the weekend, the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is exact, and it's already pretty exact. And so this means that you really can bring to bear the power of Pluto as the working week draws to a close, and certainly into the weekend when that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction really comes together. Then you might have some very clear ideas. You might be able to put those ideas into action. That is a real possibility. but yeah, it does maybe require you to, first of all, work out what is happening. As a Scorpio, you are, quite sensitive. There are all sorts of things you can tune into on an emotional level, and you can almost tune into the spirit of the world. If you believe that such a thing exists, because the world does have a spirit. It crosses all boundaries. Maybe it's connected with the collective consciousness, and so you can really tune into all of that. And once you understand where the world is pushing you, that would be a call to action. But as far as today is concerned, I don't think there's necessarily anything you have to do, but it's more about a growing realization. And, from a social perspective, yeah, I've already said it. I think you can go through the motions socially. You know what's expected of you. You know how to behave. But it just might be that on your social rounds, you pick up a few things. You start to understand some things. And so the picture is becoming increasingly clear. But it just might not be, until the weekend that you can really move forward and really understand what it's all about. So, I would suggest that, you plan on having a focused weekend. I won't say a busy weekend, because there's no point in just doing stuff for the sake of it. But, there is this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. I think it does require some focus. And I think it's important over the weekend that you're able to focus on your own interests in your own way. That doesn't mean to say that you need to be surrounded by other people. In fact, over the weekend, there's an argument for saying that you should have as little contact with other people as possible. It depends what you're trying to achieve, and it depends what you think of that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction and how it occurs to you. It may be that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction makes you think that you've really got to get your message out, that you've got to talk to people. It could work like that you've got to pursue your ambitions in a social sphere. Now, you might well take that view, in which case, yes, then you have to be as sociable as you can be. But it might also be the case, Scorpio, that you recognize that there are certain things that only you can do, and if you want to fulfill your potential, you need somewhere to exercise your power in such a way that you're not disturbed, that there's nothing tripping you up, but you don't have to worry about other people and their annoying demands. Sagittarius. The moon continues to move through Virgo, and that's important for you, Sagittarius. It remains important. It is a placement for the moon which is quite ambitious. There are certainly things that you want to get on with. You want to pursue them, as far as you can, and I think that you can have a modest level of success, but you can't expect everything to come together. And the problem with the moon in Virgo is that it is void. The moon has made its last major aspect before leaving the sign, and that's it. And so, although you might be very ambitious today, you might feel that there are things you want to address, you want to focus on, you might be trying your hardest. There is this question about where exactly are you going with it, and if you're looking for concrete results, you might be disappointed. And it's just a case for perhaps of getting over the eclipse. So we had the eclipse on Wednesday, and okay, the moon has moved on. The moon is of course no longer in Leo, and so having had that shock, the new lunar cycle, your first impression might be, Sagittarius, that this lunar cycle is just not going anywhere. Something has changed, but has it changed in any concrete way? Well, it appears that it hasn't. But the moon doesn't stay in Virgo for too long. Over the weekend it will move into Libra. Pretty soon it will move into Libra, and so that does create more possibilities for action. But short term, you shouldn't expect results, and it just may be a question instead of just exercising sort of constant force. You see something through, or you try to see something through, but you don't have any expectations. You're just keeping things together. You're keeping the energy going as long as you can, and but the immediate results, if there are any immediate results, well, they probably already happened. But there is a positive side to the moon being void. Of course, it might just mean that not a great deal is going on if the moon is applying to nothing. So you can perhaps make your own decisions today, and you make your own choices. And if you want to be mildly experimental, Sagittarius, then I think you can be. What you mustn't allow to happen, Sagittarius, is to allow yourself to become frustrated, to feel that this is just annoying. So many things you want to happen, and you just cannot get it together. And it could feel very frustrating. And I think it's important, Sagittarius, that you don't fall into that trap. So if you find yourself feeling annoyed because there isn't enough action, I think that you just need to remind yourself that this is a temporary situation. It's not going to last for very long, and indeed, I think that by the weekend things should be starting to move. And also, Mercury is beginning to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and this conjunction is exact over the weekend. And having Mercury conjunct Jupiter means that at the very least, you're going to be able to really express yourself. I mean, I think you can express yourself pretty well today, actually, because of this conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter. It's just that, with the moon being void, it may not be that other people are going to be particularly responsive to you. There's nothing wrong with what you're saying. There's nothing wrong with your message. In fact, with Mercury conjunct Jupiter, right now, you do express yourself very well, but sometimes doing one's best isn't enough. I don't know what people need, but it's just not enough, and it's just kind of just maybe difficult to get through to people short term. But when the moon moves into Libra, I do think that things will be easier, and so something is happening, and you are starting to understand things with Mercury conjunct Jupiter. And also Mercury conjunct Jupiter can be a good aspect as far as relationships are concerned. I mean, Jupiter is your ruler. Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. And so Mercury conjunct Jupiter may talk about a relationship that is starting to work, even if it doesn't feel like it today. And maybe over the weekend you'll get some evidence that things are happening. So perhaps over the weekend you need to make room for a particular relationship, give someone a chance. You only have to give them a chance. It's not like you're making any commitments. And when I do your horoscope for the weekend, I will certainly be talking about this conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter in greater detail. Capricorn. If you have been listening to my forecasts for the 12 signs, okay, I've done 9 of the 12 signs, and Capricorn is the 10th. You might have noticed that I'm somewhat sort of downbeat. I'm not particularly enthusiastic in terms of what I say, and the reason is the moon is void. it's difficult to be enthusiastic when the moon is void. And what do I mean when I say the moon is void? What I mean is that the moon has made its last aspect before leaving the sign. And so this is what astrologers call the moon being void, of course. Now, to be more specific, last aspect, that means the last major aspect before leaving the sign. And so the moon is the moon's in Virgo, and it just isn't going anywhere. I mean, over the weekend it moves into Libra, but for the moment it's all very quiet, and that might be how it feels, even though it seems to you that there is a possibility, there are possibilities. It seems that there is something exciting about to happen. So that does exist, but you can't quite see it. So yeah, a lot of potential. It seems to be a lot of potential, but it just doesn't happen. And that shouldn't worry you at all. In fact, today, Friday, perhaps you should regard today, Friday, as a day when you can just watch, listen, perhaps do some gentle exploring, but without thinking about the result. And that's probably the way to get through today, just not thinking about results, because I don't think there are any results to be had. And you can reflect on the past and reflect on this the eclipse on which was on Wednesday. I mean, I don't think that this eclipse is going to have a huge impact on the average Capricorn, at least in a relative sense. I think there are other signs that were going to be more impacted by this eclipse than you, and maybe Capricorn, you're starting to recognize that, and so that means that perhaps you can make your own decisions. So if there's something you want to do, you can do it. I don't think anyone's going to get in your way. Although you still think that something should be happening. That's kind of what you want. You'd like it to happen. You kind of feel that it should be happening, and then it doesn't happen. But maybe Capricorn, you should be thinking ahead. You should be thinking about the weekend. Now, the weekend is a different matter, and it's not something I'm going to talk about here, because I want to talk about your horoscope for Friday, not your horoscope for the weekend. But there is a change coming up, and that is the moon moving into Libra. And I think when the moon moves into Libra, that is something really very positive. And the moon will then make a conjunction to Venus. It will make a trine to Uranus, trine to Pluto. And in fact, that whole grand trine in air will start to come together. But the problem about the moon moving into Libra, I mean, I don't think it is a problem. I think on balance, I think it's a really good thing for the moon to be moving into Libra, as I'll explain them when I do your horoscope for the weekend. But the problem with it is that the moon moves out of an earth sign. Okay, the moon might be void, of course, but at least it's in an earth sign. There is some application to the real material world. Might not be much, but it is there, and so perhaps Capricorn, there's just something, even though the moon is void, that needs to be finished off. You're looking for a concrete result. You need to make sure that something you've done really has stuck. And so if you've been trying to get your message across, if you've been trying to do something of a material nature, just make sure it has been done properly. Make sure that something has been registered, something has been logged, that there is some acknowledgement. It might be, for example, that you need something in writing just to tell you that something has been done. Don't assume that people will necessarily just remember. And, you are looking for just some evidence that you've done something. And that's what you're trying to sort out with this moon in Virgo. But I don't think you should have, big expectations of the moon in Virgo. But, as I said, don't worry. The moon is about to move into Libra, and I think that represents a very different proposition. Aquarius. Many of us are still getting over the eclipse, regardless of our sign. And this eclipse was, at least on paper, rather dramatic. It was a total eclipse of the sun. We had 4 planets in Leo, so we were expecting something big to happen, and I think a lot of people were impacted by the eclipse. But now it's a Friday. The eclipse was 2 days ago, and there's just a possibility of feeling that. What was that all about? And it may even be something rather anticlimactic about today. Where are things going? Maybe they're not going anywhere at all. And we do have a void moon. In fact, we have a dearth of lunar aspects. So the one thing you can count on when you're doing this kind of astrology is the moon. The moon's always aspecting something. Okay, you can always find minor aspects, but there's a dearth of major aspects involving the moon. And the moon is process, the moon is action. So if the moon isn't making any major aspects to traditional planets, so what exactly is going on? And it just could be that the potential is there, but the potential is kind of frozen. It's just stuck in a moment of time, and we're wondering what actually happens now. And so that is that void moon energy, the moon having made its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving Virgo. And so this void moon may be having an impact. And so where is the potential? I mean, there are still 3 planets in Leo. They're still there. In fact, there's a conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter forming. That Mercury-Jupiter conjunction will be exact over the weekend. And not so long ago, Mercury was making an opposition to Pluto, and Mercury is now making this conjunction to Jupiter, and at least tomorrow it is. And maybe you need to think again about that Mercury opposition Pluto, even though it was quite a long time ago. Don't forget, you have Pluto in Aquarius. You have Pluto in your sign. And the question is, what are you doing with your Pluto? Because, it could be argued that, Pluto needs you. Yeah, it really might. Why else is Pluto in your sign? And Pluto stays in your sign till the 2040s. And it's kind of asking you to be an agent of transformation. Maybe you're channeling Pluto, and that's part of your role. And Aquarius, you can be quite logical about things, and you might look around you, and you might think there isn't really much opportunity to channel anything. But maybe you need to think a bit harder about it. Maybe Mercury opposition Pluto a few days ago gave you an idea about what you could do. Maybe someone else gave you an idea. And in fact, that might well be how it was. So think about how other people are occurring to you. How the outside world is occurring to you. What kind of pressures are on you, and what kind of challenges you've been presented with. And there might have been a challenge for action, a challenge for you, to really sort of take control of the situation and to channel that Pluto energy. Where is the scope for transformation? I think Aquarius, where it is, but right now you might not be in the mood, or you feel you've got something better to do, or just things are a bit sort of complicated. But it's not something that is going to go away, obviously, with Pluto in your sign until the 2040s. And Mercury is about to make a conjunction to Jupiter. Now, it could be that you could say that Mercury, it made the opposition to Pluto. Now it's making a conjunction to Jupiter. Mercury is bringing that Pluto energy into awareness, perhaps through another person, perhaps through a particular set of circumstances that are starting to manifest, but it's going to be perhaps stronger and more intense as you move into the weekend. But I think you do have a growing sense of obligation, a feeling that there's something that you are meant to be doing, and by observing other people, by interacting with other people, I think you can have a better understanding of what exactly needs to be done. And you are quite capable, Aquarius, of causing upsets and shocks if you want to. Because if you think about it, today there's not much going on in general, astrologically, and the moon is void. And so that might be the general assumption. But maybe you can be the person who creates some action which sort of seems to go against the grain. It's not what people were expecting. You bring something down which is kind of new and original and transformative. Yeah, that is certainly something you can do when you see the opportunity. It's not just like doing it just for the sake of it. You see the opportunity and then you act quickly. It's like it comes from nowhere. Maybe you almost come from nowhere. You weren't doing anything. You weren't particularly visible. Then you can suddenly make your presence felt. And that might be your contribution to the day, because it is a day when not a lot appears to be going on. But don't worry, even if nothing happens, as you move into the weekend, things do change. The moon moves into Libra. There's a grand trine in air signs over the weekend, and I think that grand trine can work very well for you, as I will explain in my next video. Pisces. The moon is still in Virgo, and the moon doesn't do anything in Virgo. There are no major aspects involving the moon, at least the moon, and traditional planets. And so it could be a situation, Pisces, where you have to think about other people. You're thinking about, what other people are doing and what other people want. But at the same time, they seem that people have a lot of potential, but do they actually reveal that potential? And the answer might be no. And so there could be a feeling, Pisces, of a certain amount of disappointment. You expected more from people. You were kind of sure maybe that someone was going to deliver. It appeared maybe that a certain relationship was coming together, but there is sort of scope for disappointment. Moon void, of course, in Virgo, in your opposite sign. You were prepared to give other people a chance. You were prepared to let other people take the action, make the moves, but maybe they just didn't take advantage of the opportunity. But, there is an advantage of a moon being void, of course. It means that nothing is going on. Other people are not prepared to reveal their hand. They're not prepared to do anything. And so that, in a way, could give you, a great sense of freedom, even though at the time it might feel rather frustrating. I think you could feel certainly frustrated. So many things that you would like to be doing, and you can see the possibilities, but nothing is going on, and it just might feel that this is a permanent situation, and it feels as if something really might be stuck. But I don't think that it's going to last forever. And additionally, Mercury is making a conjunction to Jupiter. Jupiter is, of course, your ruler. So if Mercury is making a conjunction to Jupiter, that certainly does allow you to think. it allows you to plan. It allows you to organize and create, in your own way. It's a very specific way, and it doesn't need anyone's help. And perhaps that's the key thing. Yeah, sure, the moon in Virgo does indicate that you should be requiring other people's help. You should be cooperating with other people. It should be the case that someone is there for you. But once you recognize today that you are perhaps alone, even though Mercury is conjunct Jupiter, I think it's different tomorrow when the moon moves into Libra. Then you'll perhaps start to see the Mercury conjunction Jupiter in a different way. But for the moment, I would have said that this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, in a positive sense, is going to work more in an organizational rather than a relationship way. And so, you can positively, organize and even transform your environment. It may just start as just basic organization, but then the Pluto energy starts to manifest. That Pluto energy is hidden. I mean, Pluto is in your 12th house. I mean, if we use the signs, and the Aquarius is the 12th house or 12th sign from Pisces. So yes, that transformative energy is hidden, but it wants expression. And I think that you've just had Mercury opposition Pluto, and Pluto was asking you to really transform your immediate environment, the way you run your life, your routines, and so forth. And this has been the case, since November of 2024 when Pluto went into Aquarius. But now Mercury, having made that opposition to Pluto, it's perhaps more immediate. And so perhaps a few days ago you saw the potential for change, and you perhaps recognized that if you could change something apparently small, like your daily routine, what time you get up. It might seem kind of trivial, or what time you go to bed, and so on. You make some small change, and then something else changes, and something else changes, and maybe the whole world changes because of something you do that appears to be very small. And that would be about you recognizing the Pluto energy. And we've just got Mercury making the conjunction to Jupiter now. Mercury moving the energy of Pluto, but it picked up at the opposition and moving it towards the conjunction of Jupiter, and Jupiter is your ruler. And so I think that if you are looking for change, just of a whole way you run things, then I think it is coming together, and it might really come together, over the weekend. And in my next video, I'll be talking about the weekend and what Pisceans can expect. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 15, which is modesty. It's a very low-key hexagram, as its name suggests. It's not about singing your own praises, obviously. It's about understanding what you can do, understanding your limitations, and then just quietly getting on with it. And, in the process, you don't want to be too modest. Modesty does not mean doing nothing. Modesty does not mean hiding. Modesty doesn't mean that you should not discuss what you can do. You just need to be honest about what you can do. If you can do something well, and people need to know that you can do something well, then you need to tell them. And you're not being arrogant. You're just being honest. And that's what you need to do. Because what you absolutely don't want to get involved in with this hexagram is false modesty. That's absolutely not what you should do. Or just feeling that people aren't interested. People are interested in who you are. They don't want anything less than what you are or more than what you are. Just so stick to the truth about yourself, and don't be overly modest. That would be quite self-defeating. And so we have two lines moving here, and we have the bottom line moving, and the bottom line is just about being realistic. It's being realistic, not being pessimistic. If you can do something, make sure you do it, and make sure people know you can do it. Because what would be a real shame is if you were overly modest, you didn't tell people that you were able to do something, and as a result an opportunity got missed, or something was done badly. Maybe someone does a task who isn't really up to that task because you kept quiet. So it's important not to keep quiet. And then the third line moves. The third line moves, well, it does contain a certain danger. With the third line, there's some danger of talking up your abilities just too much, and certainly you shouldn't be overwhelmed by your own genius. That's not what is required, but instead it's just about you deciding what needs to be done, what needs to be said, and you just going ahead, you just do it. So it's a really very sort of solid hexagram, and it kind of links with the fact that we've got Moon in Virgo. The Moon in Virgo. Okay, the Moon might be void, of course, in Virgo, but the Moon in Virgo understands what it needs to do, and it just gets on with it in a sort of a quiet, no nonsense kind of way, and that allows us to move to the second hexagram. So the second hexagram is hexagram number 24, which is return. With the previous hexagram, it's with modesty. It seems that there was something that needed to be done in a no-nonsense kind of way. We did it. And we hopefully did it well. I think we can do a good job, provided we're realistic and provided we use what abilities we have in the right way. And having done it, then we can take the view, well, job done. That might be how return works. We've done the job, and then things can just return to normal, because that is how return might be seen. So we've taken something as far as we can with return, and we've known our limits. That says something about modesty. We knew what the limits of our abilities were. We knew what the abilities of the environment were, what the limits of the environment were. We went as far as we could, and then we just returned, and things are back to normal. And it could be also that, with the I Ching talking about return, it talks about after 7 days one returns. So if you're waiting for something to return to normal, maybe at some level today things will start to become more normal, be more sort of controllable, and perhaps the chaos of the past is starting to settle down. And of course this relates to perhaps to the eclipse. So we had the eclipse on Wednesday, and the eclipse may have really stirred things up, and we were wondering where it was all going. And then today might be the first day where things are starting to return to normal, return to a situation where things are more under control. But something has changed, I think. Well, I'm adding that. I mean, that is an astrological view. I mean, from an I Ching perspective, if things are returning, it means that surely we've gained something. So we went out as far as we could. We were able to benefit at some level. We had some realizations, and now we're just coming back. And that is perhaps a good way to end the working week. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. As you know, I have started the membership section of this channel. I've just put up the second video because what you get for being a member is an extra video every week. The first video was on electional astrology. The second video was an introduction to midpoints, and I've just put that up. So that's what you get short term if you become a member. You get to see that introduction to midpoints video, but if you don't want to be a member, that's fine. I'm not taking anything away. I'm still putting up my daily videos plus my weekly preview, which I put out on Saturday. So there's no pressure there. Who am I to pressurize anyone? But yeah, that's it. So thanks again for watching this video, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.